So in the last video, we looked at altering the velocity an object is moving in based on the analog stick being pressed in a certain amount in a direction. So the furthest being pressed over, the faster the object moves. So let's take that a step further now, and just as an object would move faster, if it has an animation, then you'd expect that animation to move faster as well. So I just dragged and dropped this animation cycle, so it's just a series of images and from an external folder. Now, the one thing that I do is when you first import these, they will show up as a texture. All I did was change it to a sprite and then hit apply. So let's go ahead and create a new game object. So this time it will be empty, and we'll just call it player. Click on player. If you don't have the animation tab up here, you can just right click and choose add tab. So click on animation and it should tell you that it's going to create an animator, and it's going to tell you where. Right here, the name. It's on player. As we said, that's the name of the object. So click on create, and we'll call this walk. And what you do is you can highlight them all at the same time and just drag and drop them up there. And zoom in a little bit with the scroll wheel. And what we want to do is we want this to cycle back. So this is just them taking a full step forward with one foot. Now you have to cycle back through with the other. So we'll just drag and drop these in. And there we go. Now the default frame rate is 60. That's way too high. So let's change this to like 14. And this we're going to alter anyways, which is really the point of this tutorial. So we've got our player. Now that's an animation sequence, so there's no default image, so you won't see it here. But when you run it, you'll see the character walking. Okay, just going to move that up just a little bit. Now what we're going to do is we want there to be an idle animation. Okay, so there's a couple ways you can do this. If they're not moving at all, what you could do is you can just add in the sprite renderer here, you can add a single frame, and then you can put in a line of code that says disable the animator. I think we're going to do that in this one, so we'll just have them be standing. Let's use this one. This looks kind of, trying to find one that looks kind of neutral. Well, it starts with this one, so let's just use that one then. So we'll click on the player. We'll take that frame, since that's the first one in the sequence anyways, and now you can see them. It'll still be animated because the animation sequence takes precedence. So what we can do is we can take our move orb script, and we're going to drag it and drop it onto our new object. So now, as soon as we add the rigid body, then the movement will already work on the new character because the functionality is based in that script. So you just drag and drop the script. So let's add physics, and we'll call it just rigid body. We said we're not using gravity. So let's take our orb. We'll drag and drop it into our asset area, turning it into a prefab. We probably won't need it, but we'll hang on to it. Now we delete the orb from here. We'll give this a run. So even though they are standing still, unfortunately they're still going through the animation cycle, which we'll get through in a moment. We'll get to that in a moment. Now I'm going to use the controller. I'm going to move it just a little bit, and you can see them moving slowly, and then when I move more, they're moving faster. Now it's important to differentiate a couple things. One, they don't turn around because there's no flipped animation yet. Two, the animation cycle itself is the same speed. That's not changing. So you need to differentiate between the speed of the character moving across the screen and the speed of the animation cycle itself. So let's address some of those issues. So we go into the move warp script because that's what we're using to animate the object, at least should I say as far as applying a velocity. And let's go ahead and add get component animator enabled equals false. So we're saying the animator is not enabled. So let's go ahead and save that. We'll run it. And just like that, no longer animated. So that means whenever we're walking, then we want this to become animated. So what we need to do is if xval is not equal to 0, because if it's at rest, it should be at 0. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take this and change this to true. So by default, at the beginning of this object's instantiation, which happens when the scene begins, the animator is disabled. If this is not equal to 0, so that means the analog stick is being pressed left or right. So if it's not equal to 0, then it should be set to true. Else, so that means it is equal to 0, then we need it to go back to false. So remember that very often, if you make a change, you got to make sure you undo that change if you no longer want it to be occurring. So if we run this, now we'll be closer to where we want to be. So at the start, it's not animating. If I move the controller, it starts to animate while they're moving. If I let go, it stops again. Move again, and it's animating again. So we're really close to where we want it to be. Character needs to flip horizontally, and the other thing is the character. We said we want the animation cycle to actually be faster. So what we're going to do is just as we're modifying velocity based on these, we're also going to modify the animation speed. So that would be get component animator speed. So if they're walking slow, see, there's a couple ways you can do this. When you set up that frame rate, you can set it to a very low number to begin with, or you can set it somewhere in between, and either way you can modify it with the values coming out of the controller, the gamepad. So we can change the speed to, say, let's just put in xval for the moment and see if that's too slow. So in other words, the speed is going to be adjusted to the value that is coming out of the controller. See how that looks. So I'm going to press left. Oh, let's press right since she's facing right. I'm going to press just a little, And see how it's very slow now? Press more. And actually that looks just about right. So left isn't working yet. That's fine. We'll work on that. But press a little bit. It's a little bit too slow because they're moonwalking. But at least you know how to do it. Now the whole idea is that you're modifying speed based on the controller. Now, as we said, it doesn't work when it's a negative. So what we can do is we can use the absolute value of that. And the way to do that, there is this function mathf.abs. So in other words, it will never be a negative. I didn't want to do that the first time because I wanted to build you up to the idea of what we're doing. So now, slowly, walking slower, faster. Now we'll try left, and now it is working. Now the character just needs to flip over. So again, I wanted to differentiate between, or should I say I wanted to demonstrate between animation rate, the frame rate of their animation cycle, and their velocity. They're two entirely different functions. They don't automatically work. You have to give separate instructions to them. And so the last thing is that we would just need to flip it horizontally or vertically. Probably could just use Euler angles for that. So this we said, if it's not equal to 0, enable and disable. And then we can just do if xval is less than, if xval is less than 0, then we want get component Euler angles, and I believe we're rotating that on the z-axis. So it'd be new vector 3. So we don't want to change to 0. We don't want to change horizontal, vertical. Well, I shouldn't say horizontal, vertical. I should say x and y axes. We're just changing z, and we're flipping it by 180. And once again, we take this, and this time if it's greater than 0, then it should be the default 0. Okay, let's try this. So left, oops, nope, wrong axis. So it's not the Z. So oops, no, this one will always be 0. There we go. And so that basically concludes this lesson. We've demonstrated that you don't have to redraw the image all over again. You can just flip it left and right. That's a very old technique. Has been done for many years now to save redrawing animation. So you can flip the image. You can change the velocity of the object, and you can change the speed of the animation cycle. And if you want to, we could actually go even one step further, but I think I'll save that for another video. We can actually do entirely different animation cycles. So if they're like in an all-out run, then the animation cycle really should be different. Other than power walking, your motion is actually different when you're running. So that should do it for this one.